Welcome to Mary's Mantle Consecration, and today we are looking at the virtue of, I think we had tenacity, and I'll be talking though about endurance. Today we're praying for Bobby Becker, Kathy Cicero, and Ali Gali. And so we'll begin today with our opening prayer, and then we'll take on our reflection. Please show me the sweet compassion that you showered upon Juan Diego, your messenger. Please give me a pure and virtuous heart like your own, so that I might derive the same consolation, the soothing of my pains, and the lifting of my soul, that Juan Diego received for the gentle words you gave to him centuries ago. Listen, put it into your heart, my dearest one, that the thing that disturbs you, the thing that afflicts you, is nothing. Do not let your countenance, your heart be disturbed. Do not fear any sickness, nor anything that is sharp or hurtful. Am I not here? I who am your mother. Are you not under my shadow of protection? Am I not the source of your joy? Are you not in the hollow of my mantle, in the crossing of my arms? Do you need anything more? All right, so our talk today is on endurance. This will be the seventh star. A prayer in depression and loneliness. Lord, I feel so sad, and I miss times long gone. The dark night has descended and obscured your light. My insides are twisted into thorny vines. Confusion is my daily bread. I search for a true friend and reach for dreams, while my spirit languishes in forced conversation and banal distractions. I am alone. My mightiest of efforts lead nowhere, and my hands reach out to touch failure. My family is a home of strangers, our unity broken into factions and of silence and scorn. Where is your good news? Is there none for me? When I cling to you, I cannot feel you. When I talk with you, I cannot hear you. You say you are there, but you are as elusive as the sunrise at midnight, or a bonfire in a frozen tundra. Do not take away your hand from me, Father. Do not close your ears to my silent screams at night. How can you be my light when I cannot see you? How can you be my rock when I cannot feel you under my feet? The ground below is trembling and cracking, and the sky above is closing off the stars. Where did you go? The darkness, it scares me, and I need you. Give me at least one sign, one scant hint that you care, that you exist. You once felt so close as to fill my lungs with your breath, but now I feel dropped like a ball with no air. Yet even in this journey of frightening sadness and meaningless hours, I will take one step forward, and tomorrow another. I will endure, because my desolation is not truth, and the shadows speak lies. Beyond my shattered mind is a beautiful life and a beautiful me that I cannot see. but you do, my Lord, you do. This one is, I think, a prayer that probably every one of us has prayed, maybe different words, and maybe we're praying it right now. But life can get extremely hard, extremely lonely, extremely disappointing, and there doesn't seem to be any answer. It just seems like troubles multiply. And this has been true again for the saints. And I think about Alphonsus Liguori. He's one of my heroes. And, you know, he was a bishop, and he started an order of the Redemptorists. And he was beloved by the church, by the Holy Father. He wrote many, many works in the church. He's later been declared a doctor of the church. But he was afflicted with crippling arthritis, so much so that it literally, his chin dug even a hole into his chest because it was always, he couldn't lift his head. And in order to be able to celebrate the Mass, they had to get a gold straw because there was no way for him to be able to take any kind of liquid otherwise. And yet he would still have himself carried to different places to minister the sacraments or to assist others. But what was so crucifying, okay, is in this dark time, the person that he trusted the most to bring his order for official approval to Rome actually rewrote the rule, changing much of it, and had him sign it, and he couldn't see, and he trusted him. And he also gave him a bad name, so much so that the Holy Father wouldn't even allow his name to be mentioned in his presence. And he was actually kicked out of the same order that he founded and died that way. And so we find that this life many times has incredible crosses, and yet that heroicity, okay, that ability to endure, to love God, to trust Him, even as it is so painful because it seems like God has closed the door and doesn't hear us. Saint Therese felt that way also. And she described herself as being a little bowl for Jesus. And she said, you know what? Sometimes he may have picked me up and played with me and hugged me, but I feel like I'm tossed off in the yard, maybe even popped, okay, to see what's inside, and left there. And she said, but that's okay. I'm here for him. And he'll get more tired of not having me than me of waiting for him. And it's a beautiful words, but very hard to live out. Father Walter Chizek is one of my great, great heroes. He was a native of Pennsylvania. He died in Pennsylvania, but he spent many, many years in Russia. And he was considered a Vatican spy, and he was sentenced to Siberia for 15 years. But before that, he was 5 years in a prison, solitary confinement. So for those 5 years, he talked to no one except for an inquisitor, or you call the word, and he would get interrogated and interrogated and interrogated, and then silence, and then, and you never knew when, and it might be the middle of the night, and it might be a whole evening, or it might be the morning, and so at one point in his time at Lubyanka, which is the place where he had solitary confinement, he completely failed as far as he was concerned. His ability to always outwit anyone who tried to, come into whatever you want to call it,
and a kind of comparison with him, because he was very, very smart, and he knew how to use words, and he was like a lawyer. But because of being in solitary confinement and feeling, the only person he talked to became very friendly and made him, at one point though, during the interview, all of a sudden threatened him. And the disappointment and the anger and the sense of just powerlessness allowed him to sign papers that were totally false. And yet he was kept on. And he figured at this point he would be sentenced to death or to the labor camp, but instead, that was during his first year. He had 4 more years to endure of solitary confinement. And so at another point, he found himself completely worn out, so much so that he actually fell into despair. And it was so black and so dark, and there was a loss of utter faith and belief even in God. And he didn't know how to describe it. He didn't know how long it was there. But when he woke from it, he was in a cold sweat, utterly horrified at the darkness and the blackness of where this mindset had gone. And he realized that he immediately had to call out to God, even though God seemed to be deaf. And then it dawned on him that our Lord also felt all that loneliness when he was in the agony of the garden. And, he cried out to the Father. And the Father, he couldn't even hear him. On the cross, he said, "Father, Father, why have you abandoned me? And yet your will be done." And it was this will that he realized is where we end up often having the confusion. And this was his breaking point and freedom. From that time forward, although he had an amazing amount more hardships to endure, this ability to realize that God's will isn't out there. It isn't something to find. He said, I had always trusted in God. I'd always tried to find his will, to see his providence at work. I'd always seen my life and my destiny as guided by his will, and at some moment more consciously than others, I had been aware of his promptings, his call, his promises, his grace. At times of crisis especially, I tried to discover his will and follow it to the best of my ability. But he was given the ability to have a new vision, because up until this point, I'd always seen my role, or man's role, in the divine economy as an active one. Up to this time, I had retained in my own hand the reins of all decisions, actions, and endeavors. I saw it now as my task to cooperate with his grace and to be involved to the end in working out of my salvation. God's will was out there somewhere, hidden, yet clear and unmistakable, and it was my role, man's role, to discover what it was and then confirm my will to that, and then work at achieving the end of God's providence. But he realized that it was always going towards it, and he was trying to discover it and then to be able to give himself to it, instead of realizing that the very situation that he was in God's will. And when it came to this, it changed everything. Then he didn't care. He didn't care if he was going to be executed. Okay, human fear might have been there. Okay, and he'll bring that out later in this book as well. But he said, or if he was going to be sent to Siberia, or if he was going to be on these crazy other ways of living in Russia or in other parts of the world, according to the Inquisitor. But there was this freedom. And this freedom is something that he chose never to lose, even in great darkness. The moment that he actually leaves Lubyanka, okay, that solitary confinement, he's confined into a train cart, and it's a, one for freight, and all these people are piled into it. And he was put in there with other people who were going to Siberia, but they were all people who were the thugs, they were the murderers, they were thieves. None of them were political prisoners like himself, and they despised political prisoners. And they had no problem killing people, taking what they had, and they took all of his stuff from him. And he couldn't do anything. And when he had a little bit of a look of a glare, they were going to go ahead and beat him up. And at first, again, everything, his natural inclinations went in, and he began worrying about his life, and he became angry. And then he was able to say, you know what, if God has me here, he has a reason. And he was able to work with that grace, despite all of its hardships. And this continued throughout his time in Siberia. We are in those kind of situations sometimes in our families, in our workplace, in our in our relationships, and it can become so hard. Or even just in our world today, where it just seems like the world that we grew up in is completely different than the world that we're in or seeing a future for. But we have to know that some things are out of our control. All we can do is conform ourselves to the will of God and follow where it leads, and not give in to worry or taking on the responsibility that belongs to another that God gives to. And in this way, we can find our peace.